of RotoWire TV, and filling in for Chris Liss today is Derek VanRiper. Of course, I'm Jeff Erickson. Derek, you are doing Charging the Mound with me in the next 2 weeks as Liss hammers on the football magazine. So first of all, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right. You started up doing a lot of work on Charging the Mound this week. You did the good opening foray, talking about Jean Segura and what a big breakout he's having so far this year. How do we value him? And some of the other nuances about him. And I thought there's a couple interesting points. One, it's not just that he's an outlier this year. It's that there's an order of magnitude difference. That he's just not merely just an outlier. That he's a guy that is just broken the needle, as you would like to say. He's off the seismograph. And I think it's hard to put a good value on a guy like that when we don't expect this coming in. So let's talk about him specifically first.
Yeah, I mean, it all started with the late draft we did with the Yahoo guys on Monday. Brad Evans took him in the 4th round. It was a 10-team mixed league. It was ahead of Starling Castro, who went for quite a bit more in tout and labor. I think there was about a 12-round gap in where they were selected in labor, which is a draft, and probably a $20 difference or close to it in the tout auction, which just says a lot about how much Segura has really closed the gap just with 6 weeks of performance. Historically speaking, you look for guys that might pace for what Segura's about to do. I mean, you and I went back and forth and kind of decided that maybe a 15-homer, 30-steal season, and actually something a little better than that is in the offing for Segura. But if you look back through the expansion era, going back about 50 years now, there have been 12 seasons like that. 2 of them belong to Barry Bonds. So really 11 different players in their first or second season have had a 15-plus homer season with 30-plus steals in year 1 or year 2.
Right. And, we were comparing, there's this natural inclination to say, hey, he's going to regress. He's going to regress. We talked about it on the air today on Sirius XM. Chris and I did. And, one of his followers on Twitter said, hey, regression is the mean. Well, what is the mean? I mean, with a guy that doesn't strike out much, a guy that has such a little bit of track record, I think we kind of assume that the mean is a lot lower than it is. I think there's a natural tendency when you have a big outlier like this is that he's going to regress pretty far. But Segura doesn't strike out. He's going to run. His circumstances have changed. He's higher in the batting order now. It's not just that he's going to come back. It's what he's coming back to. It's the same Mike Trout discussion all over again. Maybe not the order of magnitude that Trout provided last year, but it's still the same sort of concept.
Right, and I like to use history as a relative guide, and I think that was the side Ron Chandler was on with the Trout kind of regression bandwagon this offseason. You can learn a lot from history, but at the same time, you have to be able to kind of analyze what's actually happening in the present. And with Segura, he's particularly tricky because the power really is at a level you wouldn't have expected at, given his age and given the fact that he didn't hit any home runs last year after getting called up with the Brewers too. There's really no indication that this year, 2013, would be one where Segura could be this 15 to 20 home run guy. But if you look back at the scouting reports from the Baseball America Handbook and from Kevin Goldstein of Baseball Prospectus as recently as last season when he was still the property of the Angels, they both pointed to 15 to 20 home run potential with him. So it's not as out of nowhere as I thought. And I think that's the part that I've had a difficult time wrestling with because Segura is a player that I've seen as much of as anybody since that trade. And you look at what he's done early on this year, he hits the ball well to all field. The BABIP's really high, and that's a big part of why the batting average is so high. But as you mentioned, he's a very good runner, and the situation has really changed. He's going to see a lot of good pitches hitting second in front of Ryan Braun compared to hitting 8th in front of the pitcher, which is where he was projected to hit going into this year.
That's right. His breakout also illustrates another issue/problem. I wouldn't say problem, but an issue. In keeper leagues, you can't find a good price, at least salary keeper leagues. You can't find a good price to trade for him. I had this issue with Mike Trout last year. I had people making me offers for my $3 Mike Trout in the RotoWire Staff Keeper League, an 18-team mixed league, $260 budget. We have 10-man minor league rosters. You can't put a value high enough on a $3 player that is producing as a top 10 player overall and try to get enough value in return. So it's impossible to sell high on him right now, I feel like. And that's okay. That's okay. You have to realize that quicker than everybody else is. You were trying to trade high for him in the Staff League from Roger Anderson. Roger gave you the no-go for $55 Matt Kemp. Now, keep in mind, we have an in-season salary cap, and that's a big component of that, too. You just can't pile on salary after salary after salary. At some point in time, you have to cut it off. So I think that's one of the important things is when you get one of these breakout guys, man, I mean, it's really tough to trade him and get the right price on him, too.
Yeah, and in the case of someone like Trout, I mean, as somebody that in the auction, had he been available this year, probably would have commanded more than Camp at 55, given our inflation. A $60 player over the span of the 3 years where you could keep a guy in our league at $3 each, that's $150 in profit. He's able to sustain that level of play. So getting $150 worth of value back in that league is impossible. Nobody has the young players necessary to offer you a deal that would make sense for them to actually get Trout and still be able to benefit from it in some way. So I think it's similar. You know, Matt Harvey's also on Rogers' roster. It's a big part of why his team has been so good this year. And you look at the way those guys are both producing. You mentioned the in-season cap. I mean, if you have guys at $3, $5, $10 in a keeper league, and you have a lot of room to add these big budget inflation guys, you have a really good chance of winning a league like that. And that's the key. You have to have good young players. I think this just speaks to the importance of having the right prospects on your team and being able to profit from their eventual early career contributions.
Right, and there are multiple ways to win leagues, in this league in particular, but one formula that seems to be working right now, it's what's worked for me, is the combination of cheap guys like Chris Medlin at $1 now, $3 Jason Kipnis, $3 Mike Trout, combined with the stars that I'm paying for in the auction. I kept Miguel Cabrera over $60 in this league. You get the right pair of the right stars with the right cheap players, and it really works out. I even missed on Troy Tulowitzki last year and still was able to win. And so it's really morphing into a stars and scrubs situation for me in that particular league. But someone might beat me with a balanced team down the road too. I wanted to bring another one Segura-related note here too before we move on to some other needle breakers. One pattern that we're noticing is guys get called up maybe July, August in their rookie year, maybe even struggle a little bit, but these high pedigree guys, Trout, Segura, Manny Machado, really bust out that second year.
Yeah, and the price tag for Machado in drafts this spring, he wasn't a top 100 overall player in ADP in terms of where he was going in drafts. In auctions, he probably was a $12 to $15 type player in most settings, most mixed league settings. I'm not sure how much he went for in AL Tout or AL Labor. I would guess it wasn't a whole lot more than that, given that those were both redraft leagues. I think we need to reevaluate our expectations for young players. We realize Manny Machado at AA as a 19-year-old had a 790 OPS, which on its surface doesn't seem that impressive. When you take the context appropriately, it's a fantastic season for someone his age. He was doing it playing shortstop, no less, which just speaks to the fact that he's a premium talent, a guy that was a top 10 overall prospect going into last year. Those types of players are going to have that immediate impact right away. But I think we're often scared off by that next tier of guys. Think about like Brandon Belt, for example. We've been waiting on that power breakout from him for years. And someday he might be a 25 or 30 home run hitter at the big league level. But he wasn't held in the same regard as someone like Machado. And Belt's just one example. There's a lot of other ones. Eric Hosmer, I think, is the tricky guy. He's the guy that, when you're looking at prospects in the spring, you look at what he did during his sophomore season, and you're concerned. You think, okay, well, what could go wrong? And I think sometimes that weighs too heavily in our mind with young players instead of what could go right.
Right, and older players have things go wrong too. It's so funny that we like sometimes I think a common fantasy mistake is to put guys in a class of players, young players, Japanese players, left-handed starters that throw 95 miles an hour, whatever. We try to group them all and say they all are going to act the same when it's clearly not the case. Every single player has his own imprint, his own factors to change things a little bit. All right, let's talk about another needle breaker in the other direction. We had Joe Sheehan on the show on Tuesday. You and I did the show together. We talked about B.J. Upton. He made the comparison to Adam Dunn, that this is not just a slump. This is a change in approach. It's something that is more endemic of what we expect out of him. How low does B.J. Upton go in your rankings now?
He's probably still on the fringe of like the top 150 overall for me. I mean, we have a pretty long track record of seeing a guy that has always struck out too much. He's managed to do it with that combination of power and speed that keeps coming back year after year. How much of the increase in his strikeout rate this year can be attributed to moving to the National League, seeing a lot of pitchers that he hasn't seen often or at all as an American League player for his whole career? How much of the adjustment is just simply that? Maybe there's an injury there that he's been hiding that we don't know about. The shoulder contusion this week is unrelated to anything that happened probably before this week. But something just seems a little off there. I mean, given his age, as a guy in his late 20s, it seems highly unlikely that he would just fall off a cliff here. I think it's just a really bad run of 6 weeks when you add it all up. And I think he's one of those good high lowest guys because the price right now is going to be next to nothing on him.
Right. If you own him right now, what are you doing with him? Are you benching him? Are you just writing it out? Are you just keeping him in there and waiting for that hot streak to kick in? How do you handle this?
I mean, it depends on the depth of your league, of course. If you're in an AL only, well, NL only league in Upton's case now, he's definitely in your lineup, and you just have to wait and see what happens. But if you're in a 10 or a 12 team mixer, and the draft we did on Monday was a 10 teamer, I think you sit him down until he starts showing signs of life. And signs of life might not be necessarily a power binge; it might just be contact rates more in line with his career norms. He's a guy that usually strikes out about 25% of his at bats. He's well over 30% right now. So if that plate discipline starts to trend back into the career norms, I think that's when you start to get a little more comfortable with the idea of putting him back in your lineup in those shallow formats.
Tend to agree with you. I have him in two places. I have him in the NFBC main event. Thanks a lot for that. Team batting average is now up to a whopping, scalding 233. Climbing my way up to the top there. But I've got him there, and I'm keeping him active, although he missed games this week. That was a lot of fun. But I also have an 11-team mixed league, and that one, we only have 2 bench spots, so I don't really have a whole lot of room to play with. But I think he belongs there for at least 1 week, unless I see a spike in the contact rate this weekend. I haven't benched him yet, but I'm getting close. I won't cut him. I'm not going to get someone get the windfall, but I might bench him.
He's the ultimate high risk, high reward guy and streaky player anyway. Just given that approach, I think these guys that strike out a quarter of the time are going to be prone to month and 6-week long slumps. And if you look back at his career, take any season's monthly splits, you'll find a month that is on par or almost as bad as what he did this April. So I know it's getting to be a little bit more than just a slump at this point, but it's not completely out of the blue just based on what we've seen from before. We've seen some pretty impressive Septembers and even second halves in general from Upton throughout his career. So I think that's a big part of the reason, along with his age, as to why I'd have some confidence in him bouncing back, at least in some capacity, if not kind of close to what we expected him to be going into this year. Now, if you've had him all year, so you're probably going to be disappointed even if he bounces back, but at least from today forward, you're not going to take such an anchor, in terms of batting average and the lack of overall production.
All right. It's Needle Breakers week on RotoWire TV. Derek, you ready for a little lightning round?
Sure, let's go for it.
Starling Marte.
I think he's real, and I think he, in some ways, fits in more on the Gene Segura side of the conversation than most players. I mean, again, very young for his level, and a guy that has that impressive blend of power and speed that we're really looking for. And you got to like the fact that the Pirates have locked into that leadoff spot, too. I think that bodes very well for his chances of sustaining something close to what he's done to start this year.
Shelby Miller.
Man, Shelby Miller, you and I think, both missed out on him, but he's been an elite pedigree guy since day one. The Cardinals drafted him out of high school a few years back, and the only reason why I don't have any shares of him, he struggled so much at AAA in the first half last year. I just felt like he'd be one of those guys that goes through a pretty significant adjustment period, and maybe that will happen now that teams have more of a book on him as he moves closer to that 10-12 start range, starts to see some of the teams in division a second time. Maybe that will start to slow him down a little bit, but generally speaking, the underlying skills and just get a bet on the Cardinals' organizational track record here. I think for the most part, he actually could be a top 25, top 30 starter this year.
Let's stick with the Cardinals. Go with their current closer, Edward Mujica.
Boy, I think ever since they acquired him, he's kind of erased the home run ball from his arsenal. It's a small sample size in terms of comparing that to his career norms, but to me, Trevor Rosenthal doesn't have that second pitch really refined yet. Mujica's had a lot of success in that role. I get the feeling that the rest of the season, he's the guy that gets the most saves in that St. Louis pen.
All right, tell me one guy that you're done with that, hey, I declared defeat on this one, and I'll tell you mine after.
Brett Anderson, which he doesn't fit the topic of this conversation as a broken needle guy, but it's just one injury after another with him. I mean, the ankle is the issue right now. The performance wasn't even that good ahead of time. This is going to be the last year I'm invested in Brett Anderson.
Al Albuquerque is my surrender guy. I thought he was going to be the guy. I thought at least he'd give you great numbers if he wasn't closing. Hey, the Tigers, they called up, they re-signed Jose Valverde. They've installed him in the job. They just sent Albuquerque down. Okay, I was wrong. Sorry, guys. I thought he was going to be my guy.
The other guy I've got is Dylan G. I mean, the velocity hasn't come back to where it was last year. You just wonder if he's fully recovered from the aneurysm he had in his shoulder last year. I think that's a big part of why he just isn't the same guy. And the Mets, if they're trotting him out there something well less than 100%, I think that's really to their long-term detriment.
I agree about that. And, you always wonder about health with these pitchers. It's always a problem there. All right, Derek, thanks for jumping in this week. We'll do it again next. Thanks for doing RotoWire TV.
Yeah, it's a blast. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, this is RotoWire TV, Breaking the Needle. Thanks